Good evening, everybody.
Hello,
Thank you
hello.
for joining us today. Ian, let us know when we've got everybody.
Yeah, I'm just checking to see if we're live streaming. Yeah, we're all good to go.
Okay. Well, thank you today. Today we're having our meeting. We've got a busy agenda. We've got two interviews, one for our planning board, and the other one, he interviewed for the board regarding the internet, trying to create our own internet services for our city. He was part of the wide selective process that we went about last year. He was one of the finalists, but the committee went in a different direction at the time. At the end of last year, there was an opening that opened up again to be on that board, and the committee felt that we should give this gentleman the opportunity to be placed on the board. So I've asked him to come today so that the new council could interview him and ask him any questions they may have before we would move him forward, and then take a vote if this committee felt to move him forward as well. So we've got himself and the planning board member that's looking for reappointment, and then we have inclusionary housing. You all should have received the revised inclusionary housing document with the added language and some changes that were requested, and we can go into that when we get into that topic. First, we're going to go through the interviews, and then we'll touch that ordinance. So before we get started, Eden, can you do roll call for me, please?
So for the planning committee, Alfredo Ballerin is here, Thomas Hoey is here, Sergio Adams is here, Edward Hyde Clark is here, and then other council members is Megan Keegan and Owusu Anane.
Okay, thank you. And I know we have public comment, so let's start with public comment before we get into any of the other legislation.
Okay, so Dominic is here. He signed up for public comment.
Okay, Dominic, the floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, because sometimes this computer doesn't look good. Yeah, I'm here to talk in support of the ordinance for the changes to the affordable housing, inclusionary housing proposals and the code. Albany's a pretty weak compared to other cities and other municipalities, not just New York State, but in the United States on a whole. Just last week, the mayor of Kingston put out an executive order saying any units 5 or less have to have 1 unit designated for affordable housing, 5 units. I know in the ordinance change, we're up to, I believe it's 20 units or more. So that's, I mean, just to give you an idea, I mean, that's Kingston's a smaller city, but the affordability, the inclusionary housing is, what's needed. We just had 2 recent articles in the Times Union in the last week about the inaffordability of rents in the city of Albany, and rents keep going up. And also the Albany Business Review did a pretty good article and with the percentages, and they pointed out that almost 50% of the 2 to 4 unit buildings in Albany that are being sold to non-owner occupiers and out of area buyers. I think it was like 46% in the city of Albany. So that's pretty amazing. So we know the rental market is good in Albany, at least for the landlords. They know they're going to come and they're going to say they can't afford it, and they can't afford to have more affordable units But I sat on the Industrial Development Agency board for almost 7 years. So we got to see a lot of the, well, actually, all the proposals. We get to see the pro formas, we get to see the inside stuff that's not public. And so just in a minute, I've talked to Alfredo about this, is that I think to help the developers and out on these projects, I think the number of apartments that will be, hopefully this ordinance will be passed and will increase the number of units and lower the threshold from 50 down to at least 20 and increase the AMI, that the assessor can possibly lower the assessment on the units that will be for affordable housing. Instead of assessing each unit in development, say at $100,000 per door, if 5 of those units are going to be inclusionary housing, and the rents are going to be $1,400, it's really going to be closer to $950 to $1,050, then that unit should be assessed a little bit less for tax purposes. And one of the reasons is because when these developers, they go to the financial institutions to get the funding, well, one of the things they use in order to get the funding approved is how much income they're going to get from rents. So if a landlord is saying, well, I got 100 units and I'm getting X, I'm getting X amount of rent, but 10 of those units are for affordable housing. So he's actually getting about $250 less a month in rent, but yet he's being assessed the same amount of money for tax purposes, as the unit that he's getting the full rent from. In a way, that's not fair to the developer or the project manager or the landlord. So I think that's something we can look at to help offset increasing the affordable housing. The other thing I want to point out with the AMI, we're asking for to change from just using the city AMI to, I'm a representative on the Housing for All group. Also, to using the regional AMI would be easier, I think, in the long run, to figure out what the AMI is. So we're increasing the AMI, lowering it from 100%. I think the bill's going down to 60, Alfredo, I think. And the one thing that was pretty much pointed out, and I believe it was a Business Review article, maybe it was a Times Union. When you look at the county AMI, it's so much higher than the cities. So if you use the county AMI, even at 60%, it's still, for the city residents, it's still a pretty high number. It's probably closer to almost 80%. And it's interesting, if you want to figure this out mathematically, someone should figure out what the county AMI would be without the city of Albany included, because Albany is the largest municipality in the county, and our numbers actually bring down the county numbers, which are already extremely much higher than the city of Albany's. So I think if you take the city of Albany out of the county and then see what the county AMI is without the city, it's probably going to be, 15,000 or 20,000, even more higher than what it is already, because the city lowers it. So I think to look at a perspective of how the people in Albany, the residents of Albany, the people that need apartments in Albany, their income level is actually so much different than the rest of the county. And another reason why we believe, at least I believe, and I believe Housing for believes that we need this ordinance, is because the city of Albany not only being the capital of the state, but we're the center of the county services. So a lot of the people that depend on the county services, the economically disadvantaged, the single families, they gravitate to live in the city of Albany instead of outside Albany, because that's where the services are. So again, we get more people that need to have affordable rents at much lower incomes than the rest of the county, because they move to the city or need to live in the city because of public transportation, and because that's where the county health department is located. The social services building on Washington Avenue, that's where they have to go to sign up for the needed social services that they need. And so it's located in the city, so they tend to live in the city. So Albany has a greater impact of people that are economically disadvantaged, and so it's another reason why we need to have more inclusionary housing, more affordable housing in the city of Albany. And I believe with these, if the assessor can make that adjustment, And just the fact that, no, they're gonna, I know the landlords, developers are gonna come and say, well, we can't afford it and it's gonna cost too much. But just look at the number of apartment buildings that are being sold. Alfredo just was quoted in the paper for the one in his district that was sold twice now in less than a year. And the second time was like 5 million more than it was sold a year before. So obviously these developments, they're making income, or else people want to be buying them at increased costs if they're not profitable. These developers and investment firms are not investing in something to lose money. They know they're going to still be making money, even if we do increase the number of inclusionary apartments that Albany can afford. So I think I'll stop there and let others speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. Who's next, Eden?
Anita is.
Anita, the floor is yours.
I also keep a timer and inform her when 1 minute's left.
Don't worry about the timer. I mean,
Are you sure?
we only have 2 people today. We can get through this. Anita, the floor is yours. You're muted.
Yes. Okay. I want to address another aspect of what this ordinance, the benefit from this ordinance, and that is it will help our city break down her historic problems of racial segregation. And in that respect, we can't afford not to do it. Most of the affordable housing initiatives that have been, taken in the city have been built in the historic redlined areas. We have an obligation as a city to increase and advance racial and class equity, and that means we need to have integrated neighborhoods. And we can't do it unless we're going to do these kinds of initiatives. This will give people the option of living other than, low-income people, the option of living other than in the South End and the Arbor Hill. So I just think we can't afford not to do it. The media has documented this over the years, over like 40 years or so, that we're 2 cities, that we're a city divided. And the only way we're going to get out of that mode is if positive steps are taken to reduce racial segregation. And I think this ordinance, it makes a big contribution towards that. So I'm sure that's within my time. So that's my point.
Thank you, Anita. Actually, that was less than 2 minutes because I was keeping time, and Dominic was less than 5 minutes. So thank you. Sometimes you don't give people time limits. It actually makes it much more efficient. Well, thank you both for your public comments, and thank you for your time. We're going to start by with the reappointment for the planning committee. So if planning board. So Eden, well, I know. My question is the other gentleman is Antonio?
I have not seen him. I've been trying to get in contact with him today. But as of right now, he hasn't responded or is in the Zoom chat at all. But Roman is the person who we're interviewing for the reappointments today.
I know that. If you can just try to reach out to Antonio and see if we can get him in today.
Yeah.
If not, we'll have to wait until the next meeting to hear from him. Tom, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Alfredo. Was there resumes sent out for these appointments? Because I dug through my email and I can't find them. Do we have any kind of background information on the people?
I'm not sure if the resumes were sent out. I know these are reappointments. Eaton, do you have the resumes that you can get out to committee members?
Currently not on me because I'm at my house, not on a work computer.
Okay. Mr. Woman, do you have a resume you can send to? You can email Eden if that's a possibility that he can send out to committee members. Sorry to put you on the spot. I can't hear you, sir. You're still on mute.
Okay. You want a quick verbal? Would that help? Because I know I submitted one back when I applied, 2017, but there was no request for the reappointment.
Well,
Thomas, you have any
specific?
specific questions you want to ask me as far as what
Well,
the,
maybe, and again, I don't think I was on your original appointment, so I really don't know too much of your background. I've met you at the board, and dealt with it, but why don't I let you do your introduction and maybe you can talk about your background and stuff. I'd just like to know, what type of planning background and stuff like that. Thank you.
okay.
Okay, so if you can just start by giving us a little background about you and your experience, and also, I'm going to try to avoid any hiccups that we've had in the past. So if I give the floor to someone, and anyone else has to say something, just raise your hand, and I'm gonna try to avoid any intermingling. And if there is any intermingling, I'm gonna unfortunately cut you off because I want to make sure we keep it, everyone gets their time to speak, and we move forward in that direction. So, Mr. Roman, the floor is yours.
Just before that, so I got an email from Antonio and he is withdrawing his application.
That's a letdown because everyone really liked Antonio. So that's very disappointing to hear.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Eden, you're giving me bad news today. Okay, Mr. Roman, you're on.
Evening, everybody. I know I've met quite a few of you over the last couple of years, but I've been a resident in the city of Albany since 1990. I am a native New Yorker before I went into the service and traveled the world. I ended up in Florida for a couple of years, but I did the opposite of everybody else. Everybody else goes from New York to Florida. I went from Florida to New York, but been here. And I've been here since 90, and I've been involved in valuing real estate as a commercial real estate appraiser since 92. So in dealing with valuing real estate, you get involved with zoning and variances on properties and anything that's affecting the value. So that I have that background to begin with. And I, back many moons ago when I went to college, I got a degree in transportation management. So I did have a background in, I guess you'd say, community involvement and how transportation affects that and whatnot. So that's where that came from. The actual reason why I wanted to serve on the planning board was twofold. One, I've been here since 90, and I did want to give something back to the community. I thought it was appropriate. You're living here, you might as well do something to help. And then also, because of my background, I thought I could be helpful on the committee just because of my experience with real estate. So that's why and that helped that I knew Al DeSalvo from working with him 18 years at M&T Bank. So when I happened to approach him, I did not attempt to serve on the planning board or any kind of board for the city for many years because I worked in this area to be a conflict of interest. But then I started working more in Dutchess and Orange counties and down that way. So that's when I approached Al and said, I'd be interested when there's an opening, had an opening come up. Bada boom, bada bing, here I am.
Okay, are there any questions from committee members, please? Tom?
Thank you. And thank you, Roman. I didn't know your background, and that's really good that you're in transportation because that is a hot issue in the city right now, as you probably know, and for our whole world with climate change, and we need to go to a different model. Unfortunately, my experience with planning board started when I first got elected, and there was development put up in my neighborhood, 1211 Western Avenue, still going on. It's a mess. We had an engineer in the neighborhood try to tell the people, this is not a good spot to put this building. The water table is very high, and they've run into a lot of problems there. It's 4 years later, and they're still building the foundation. There's flooding. There's no sidewalk there. People who trying to go to school and stuff. I've had a complaint to the city many times. I've had the project shut down. And it's unfortunate because, you know, I'm not anti-development. We need to get newer buildings in, but we got to really start looking. And my concern, and I see Brad there, and I've talked to Brad, that it seems like every available lot or every available empty space we're developing, and I'm just concerned about the future, the next generation or 2 generations down. If we use up all the resources now, where does the city grow? So that's one of the concerns I want to express to you, and I will support your reappointment. There's no doubt about it. I appreciate all the work that everybody on the planning board does. I've been on these meetings, not lately, but you know, there was one night there it was almost 11 o'clock, and I have a lot of respect for from 6 o'clock or 6:30 to be there for 5 hours, and then I know you have workshops. There's a tremendous amount of work, so really appreciate the dedication. But I just want to bring up that I am concerned. I'm concerned about turning the warehouse district into a living district. We need places for warehousing. We need places where goods get transferred and given out to the city. And sometimes I wonder if we're really looking at that, or are we just looking at, you know, trying to get the tax revenue in right away and not thinking about 20, 30 years down the road. And maybe that's what we need to have a little bit more of. Just trying to think if there's anything else that really hits me, but you know, you walk away from my conversation with you today. I just hope that when you look at projects, you look at the need and, you know, what's the long-term effects? Because once a building goes up on an empty lot or an empty field, it's very rare that that becomes a field again. It's going to be a building for, you know, till the city of Albany, you know, another 300 years or whatever, you know, city's already over 300 years. I do have one question, because you are in real estate. One of the arguments that I've made, and we're talking about, you've heard about the public comments on affordable housing. I always feel that ownership, and, you know, I'm first generation, my parents came from Ireland. And one of the things they stressed was education and own property. And when we build a system where it's just rental, but you really don't own the property, that you're more transient, there's a tendency that, you know, you don't, I want to say you don't care, but you don't put the same effort into something you own. And one of the things I've brought up a lot, and I keep hearing there's no market for, is why don't we have more condominiums built in the city where people can afford a partial, you know, when we put up a building, to own a, you know, piece of property in that building. It's a little bit more affordable. And I'm told, well, there's no economic level for it. But if you go up to Saratoga, and my cousin actually owns 2 condos that he rents out in 2 different buildings, there seems to be a tremendous amount of condos. So my question to you is, because you said you're involved with real estate, could we make this a viable thing for the city of Albany, that we have more condominiums and give people that chance for ownership and to be part of, you know, the city and the tax base?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer to that. I don't know why there doesn't seem to be a demand. You know, the only condominium I can think of that there was a condominium at 540 Broadway, a commercial condominium years ago, built as, you know, for that purpose, and subsequently converted back to fee ownership or lease fee ownership because it didn't work. So I don't understand it. I know that like Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, you see tons of condominium ownership there. So clearly there's some, either a tax advantage or something. I don't know what it is, why we see it more in other places than we do here. And, you know, you mentioned whether a condo ownership would be more affordable. Possibly, but those ones you're referring in Saratoga Springs, those were fairly new construction, and they're paying a good nickel for that. And the problem with affordable housing, at least from what I've been exposed to, you know, any developer, when they're going to build a property, they want to get the most bang for their buck. And I don't care what they tell you, there's no guarantee that they're going to remain ownership in 1, 2, 3, 4 years. You know, they get the right offer, they're gone. So they want to get the most money for that. With the most successful affordable housing projects are the ones that are large, where they get low income housing tax credits to allow construction to actually happen. And, you know, then you throw on top that pilot agreements and whatnot, those will happen and those will come forward. But when you get smaller properties, it's more difficult. And, you know, I read your proposal about changing the affordable housing requirement in the zoning ordinance. It's a tough line. At first I thought, gee, 20 units, that's going to be tough. You're talking at 18% is 4 units in every 20 unit. The big investor, he can afford to build a large number of units because even though he's got a certain number of affordable, that's all right, because his other costs, he's going to charge enough and make his bucks on the rest. And it's not a factor. But if you got a smaller developer or someone's taking an existing building and renovating it for apartments, it's going to be tougher for that individual to come up with the funding up front in order to allow him to do that or them to do that. I don't know what's the magic number. I've never done research in the city of Albany as far as, you know, there's a lot of 2 families, there's a lot of 4 families, 5 families, 6 family. Once you start getting into 12, 15, the numbers decrease. But where's that magic number where anything, you know, like say over 20, you know, you should have affordable housing as a requirement? I wish I knew, because I would let you know, but I just don't have the information. I don't have the good number. But I do think that the affordable housing, it's needed. We've got to do something. I know that Anita said earlier, making a point about racial equity. I think that's all important things. So I think you got to try it. I mean, worst case scenario, if it stops development within the city, you know, you got to soften the blow a little bit and change it, and then things will pick back up.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. But I'm also thinking Chapel Hill is condos, and there are condos up in the Pine Bush off Washington Avenue Extension that there was done. But we do offer tax breaks through the IDA and different government benefits. I'm just thinking if somebody's paying $1,400 of rent a month, that they might be able to afford a mortgage on some kind of property. And one of my biggest fears, and I'm going to go back to the planning part, is I hope we don't wipe out neighborhoods that are low cost right now to put up high cost buildings. And it's where the people who live there now won't be able to afford them. And that's it's gentrification. And we've seen it happen in New York City, where I'm from. You know, it was terrible what they wiped out whole neighborhoods. And you know, the yuppies moved in and they could afford the rents of $3,000-$4,000 a month. So yeah, we got a lot of work to do in the city. But thank you again for volunteering and working on the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Hyde?
Thank you. And thank you, Roman, for volunteering. You know, I've always said the planning board can only apply the law that's in place, right? So you get an application and you have to apply the USDO, and, you know, there may be issues that we have with the USDO that allow something that doesn't fit, or, you know, other issues. But, you know, planning board is really not a policy board. But what I am, my question would be, as you're going through applications, you know, are there certain aspects of the USDO that you think need to be changed that you would recommend to us as the legislative body? Do you see anything that continuously comes up as a waiver request that, you know, maybe there needs to be a change, that maybe the applicant shouldn't have to ask for a waiver every time? You know, just wondering from that aspect, giving you the chance to kind of comment to us as a legislative body what we could possibly change.
You know, the only things that come to mind as far as initially, and the Common Council did take steps to change the ordinance a couple of years ago, was regarding the blue roofs and the green roofs. And people were taking advantage of those, but not taking advantage of the affordable housing. So that was changed. I think that made it a positive impact. As far as waivers, I honestly don't remember seeing a lot of waivers coming across the planning board until recently. Recently had several properties with several waivers, and they were unique. And so I can't think of anything in the zoning that I currently see that would need to be revisited as far as regarding waivers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from committee members or any other questions from any other council members? Okay, I did have a question. So I've been attending planning board meetings for the last 4.5 years. I want to know, have you seen a shift in how the planning board has been looking at public input when it comes to these developments? I know there's a lot of criticism of the planning board at one point because it didn't seem to be responding to community members' concerns. Have you seen a shift in that, in the approach and in the way that they interact with the public?
I'd have to say no, but then I'm not concentrating on what the other board members are saying. I'm listening to what they can offer me, but ultimately I have to make my decision as part of that board. I can say that it's difficult. It's a fine line because you've got, on one side, you'll have, the neighborhoods, which will say, I don't want your development right behind me. I don't want to be looking at that big building. And then you have the property owner, which is saying, I'm building in accordance with the zoning, which is in place for my property. So it's really a fine line. Who do you go with? That's one reason why I, at least, and I'm pretty sure my fellow board members feel the same way, appreciate when the common council ward member from that area presents their viewpoints on what information they have that they've gotten from the people they spoke with who are right there, because you've got to take all that information and you've got to kind of put it all together and come up with something concrete to present to us. And I find it very helpful to get that viewpoint, because a lot of times we'll get information. And I know, Tom, you mentioned 1215 Western Ave. I don't know if you remember that. I remember it clearly because it was pretty painful. But I actually asked a question toward the end because I had several neighbors come up and say they didn't want it. I had the commercial neighbor next door saying they didn't agree with it. And so I asked the developer, you're hearing this on both sides. How do you explain that? How are you providing a benefit? And I know it put them on the spot, and it may not be completely in accordance with the zoning, but I think it was a relevant question. So that's why I asked it. But as far as a change, I don't really think so. But again, I'm not hearing what people are whispering behind my back. So I'm afraid if you're saying there's other things going on and things have changed, then maybe I'm missing something.
I don't know if there's a change in that. I just at a recent board meeting, there was a concern that came up from the Pine Hills Neighborhood Association about a building that they support, but they had some issues and concerns about the entrance. And the board, said that that's an issue that the developer needs to resolve with the, before it gets full green light. I'm not sure if that, didn't happen in my experience 4 years ago. We were trying to fight a gate to go up on. We were trying to get a gate, and we couldn't get that for our group. So I kind of, based on what I experienced in my own time here, it seemed to me as there was more willingness to listen to neighborhood associations that were coming with the residents about their concerns that affect their neighborhoods and what they'd like to see these developers do or bring to the table.
I would agree with that statement. And the property that you're referring to, I remember the last issue, which was like, what do you do with that entranceway on, I forget what street that was it Western? But I think the final decision was what settled it for all parties, and that was like the one small issue remaining. maybe not necessarily small, but what could you do at that point? For them to continue as they plan. But yeah, if you're saying about, do I think that hearing from the community is making a difference? I would say probably yes, because I think we're getting more concrete data from the communities and from the neighborhood association. And that's important. I want to hear what people who are right there are saying. Now I understand there, like they say, the NIMBYs, you don't want it if it's not I don't want it in my backyard. I understand that. I understand what the requirements are and then what the developer can do with it. But it's really important to hear what the larger community and that effect on the community is. And that's where that comes into play. So I would say yes. And I think because we're getting more data, I think we're able to make better decisions.
Thank you. And I'm also going to give credit to Brad and the planning department. I think they've also become more willing to be open to some of the concerns that come from residents. Because it was Manning Boulevard that we were looking to try to have a gate so that residents from the building that the neighborhood association did support would have a gate so that you wouldn't have back traffic coming in. So I've got to give credit both to the board and I think to the planning department and to Brad and the leadership of the planning department that they may have been, maybe you don't see it, but I can tell you I see it. And it may not be exactly what all of us would like it to be, but it's better than what it was 4.5 years ago. So I do appreciate that. Are there any other questions, concerns, comments from any committee members or any council members? Anything else you wanted to add to the conversation?
Yeah, when do I pick up the keys for my company car?
Fortunately, I don't think we have that for you.
I was wondering the same thing.
Tom.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion if that's appropriate. I'd make a motion that we move Roman's reappointment with a positive recommendation out of committee for the full council.
Okay, is there a second? Second by Hyde. All in favor?
Aye.
So that's unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Bowman, again. Oh, Mr. Adams, do you have a question?
No, no, I think my computer's just freezing. I was just voting yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, thank you, Mr. Bowman, for your time, your dedication, and all your hard work. We do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Y'all have a good night.
You too. Okay, so now let's move on with the inclusionary housing ordinance. There's nothing else. Antonio has taken his name out. Okay, so let's get into this one. Tom.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did we have the internet person? Are we going to do that?
No, he took his name from consideration.
Oh, I thought he was planning. I got confused. Sorry.
No. So what we'll probably do is we'll go back out. We'll go back out to search. Eden, if you can put a notice out. Let's give it 2 weeks for people to respond. And let's fill that vacancy. I know we're also going to be putting notices out to fill. Is it the CRC?
Yeah, the IDA and CRC.
The IDA and CRC. We've got 2 vacancies that we've got to fill. So we're going to put a notice out for those positions as well. So we have a few notices, and we'll get those. That'll be our summer project. Getting those interviews in and interviewing them. So let's get into the inclusionary housing bill. I sent out a revised version, trying to put in concerns that I heard at our last meeting regarding legislative intent, as well as try to put citations for where the data and information was gathered, so that people could backtrack and read those studies. I also was open to what the Housing for All and what the planning department suggested about making it a regional AMI versus the city AMI. And I've put that as a change as well. So it would be the regional. I also forwarded, I think Eden, you got the numbers out to everybody today. Okay, so I wanted to make sure everyone had those numbers so they can see where those numbers would lay once we switch from the Albany AMI to the regional AMI, so that make sure we're being very transparent in what we're looking at. So a lot of what you're going to see in the new legislative intent is just added some of the language that we spoke about the last meeting, and the sources for that language. Where I came up with number the 16th percent, which is the national average for inclusionary housing policies, as well as put some historical perspective of why it's important for us in this city to be looking at this based on the unfortunate history that we have with redlining, the unfortunate history that we have with our disinvested communities, and how we've saturated those communities with one type of housing opportunities. So the idea is to show you that, and I don't need to show you that. If you drive around our city, you see that. But it was important to put it in the document so that if anyone who doesn't know our city, anyone who hasn't driven around our city, has an understanding, not just numbers wise, but historically, why it's important for us to be having this conversation and moving this legislation forward. So at this time, I'll open up for any committee members if you have any questions or comments or thoughts. Tom.
Yeah, and I always have a question or a thought, or always got to get my 2 cents in. But listen, seriously, I think it's good legislation that we're going to come up with. And when we heard Roman, if we make a mistake, we might have to revisit it if it, shuts down all of the housing and, new housing in Albany. But I think we got to make the move. I think we got to move forward. And, but I think when we move forward, we still got to be kind of wary, what the impact will be. I keep saying, my mantra is, for every action, there's a reaction. So we just got to be ready that if there is something comes up, that we can maybe tweak it a little. But I'm hoping that it'll go through, it'll work, and that, this will be a real positive for the city and for the people who live in the city.
Thank you, Tom. Any other committee members, non-committee members, planning department members?
Yeah, I have some things to say. I'm happy whenever my opportunity presents itself.
You want to go next, Brad? Oh wait, Sergio, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of piggyback off of what Tom said a little bit. Just as as we're making this move to increase the units for affordability, that we also do our due diligence in monitoring the results of what we're doing, and making sure that if things are moving in the right direction, great, but making sure that we're looking at some of these developments and really looking at the effectiveness of the effectiveness that it has on that particular neighborhood or community, but as well as again, being able to make adjustments if things are looking another way, and just having the understanding that we're trying this out as one option. If this doesn't work, then we may have to come back to the drawing board and revisit some of these things, and just making sure that, along the way, that we're also thinking about other options and possibilities to better the legislation, but also improve recommendations to developers in the future. So just the 2 cents for now, but very interested to hear what Brett has to say. So you can go ahead.
Okay, Brett, I'll let you go next. Hyde, you're right after Brett.
All right, so I do have some things. I think that we may be missing an opportunity to have a little bit more of a robust debate on the topic. I think the idea of just changing a couple of numbers, while I do understand the urgency from some perspectives, we currently have some guidelines that we've adopted but haven't been codified. I do wonder from a legal administrative standpoint if those should be codified, if that has any effect on our ability to enforce moving forward. One issue that came up recently also is the issue of whether this would apply to dormitories. I think there would be an opportunity to address that in this legislation that hasn't necessarily fleshed itself out yet. I understand the comments with respect to redlining and the historical inequities. However, the policy as it's written doesn't have any geographic boundaries applied to it. We're requiring the same affordable set-asides in communities that have lower income populations as some of our communities that have higher income populations. So I would, similar to the Chicago report that I had sent around, Chicago looked at certain hot market neighborhoods that they applied the policy to instead of taking the citywide approach. And I think there are certain projects, and one that comes to mind is the St. John's Church in the Pastures neighborhood. Someone has a proposal to put 44 units there. It'll probably come to fruition in the next couple of years. That's a historic building that's falling down. I think they're going to need any piece of income they can get. And knowing the Pastures neighborhoods, a lot of that existing housing in that neighborhood is already subsidized through LIHTC or other, state or local policy. So I think in that case, allowing that to go forward without an affordable set-aside requirement might actually serve to overall balance the incomes in that neighborhood and potentially, we do talk about the risk of whether, if we mess it up, we'll come back and do it over again. But, for a historic building like that, that could be a case where, we don't get an opportunity to save the building over again. So, I would take a look at that. I would also point out there are some cases in my neighborhood in particular, and Alfredo, you mentioned one in your neighborhood, of existing buildings that are being rehabbed that don't go through any planning board process. The one in my neighborhood is the Knickerbocker Apartments. It's a 95-unit building. It's literally one of the only sources of affordable housing in my neighborhood. And I'm pretty confident when they rehab that, that's going to be an upmarket building. This policy doesn't really address that. And maybe not a knock on this policy, but maybe just a thought that this should be, there should be a broader application in some respects of what we're looking at here. When it comes down to it, the policy is an internal cross subsidy policy. So, for example, you have a 50-unit project, you're renting the apartments at $1,500 a month. That may be the top of the market. That's generally what we get online in new buildings here. Income coming in is $7,500 a month, $900,000 a year. So if you want to rent 10 of those units at, say, 50% of market, and these aren't exact numbers, I just kind of threw these together on paper. That's that's a $90,000, 10% loss on your income for the year. In order to make that up, you're going to take those other 40 units and raise the rent on those to $1,687 a month. Now, that's okay unless the market can't tolerate $1,600 and $87 a month rents. Or, for instance, the market may be such that someone doesn't want to rent a $1,500 apartment for $1,687. So I do think that this policy needs some sort of an economic analysis applied to it. Because frankly, why don't we make it 40% for that matter? Because I do support the policy in theory, and I'm not here to try and, for lack of a better word, poo-poo the legislation. You know, I do understand what's being applied here, and I'm a little frustrated that you know, people that may have stronger opinions than I do are not on the call speaking to those tonight. But you know, I just feel the need to be honest, and I think, you know, we can speak to the fact that there are other communities, you know, the average among communities maybe is 16% set aside. But the reality is, you know, and I looked at the Grounded Solution website before the meeting, and there's 37 communities in New York that have an inclusionary zoning policy right now. There are 1,545 municipalities in New York. So that's only 2.4% of communities in New York that even have the policy at all. So I think when we talk to 16%, you know, we're not factoring in those 1,500 and some odd communities that have a 0% requirement. And frankly, that's a problem. I wish the state would step in and address this, because the reality is, you know, we may look at a development and say, well, they're getting an 8% return. That's perfectly fine and good. And we may go, well, this is only going to drop that to a 6% return. But when they can go to the next community over and get an 8% return, there is a concern that they will do that. So again, I'm kind of shooting all over the board here. You know, I don't know to the degree to which a pilot agreement, for instance, could be altered to provide the further subsidy that's needed to support a policy such as this. And I think if that were the case, I think that's a very important thing to look at, but I don't know, that's not my area of expertise. So I know that Dominic is on here. I know, I totally respect the fact that Dominic was on the IDA, and I'm sure he's taken a really hard look at those numbers. And I think the people on the IDA do look at those numbers. And the fact is, we're already piloting market rate projects. So that tells me that, you know, if people are looking at those numbers the way that they're supposed to be looking at those numbers, I mean, people are getting an average return with the subsidy already. If we're going to increase the ask of them, I think we need to increase the subsidy, or at least that, you know, that's what an economic analysis would tell us. And I don't know the legal implications of how much we can do that or not. So there's a lot to digest there. You know, I do support the policy. I just think it could use a little bit more dialogue and a little bit more fleshing out of what that right number is. I mean, there's a lot of communities in New York that do have a 10% set aside. It's usually at 80% AMI, and most of those are in Westchester, or, you know, markets that have, you know, a median income that are well above Albany. And that's in a lot of cases where these type of policies tend to work. So it's by no means a criticism of the policy. It's just, you know, I think we would be well served to not have to go back and do it over again, to do a little bit more upfront. I mean, we're willing to help to the degree that we can, but I don't have an economic development background. I think there are other parties that need to be at the table with respect to that conversation. So appreciate you giving me the time, and you know, just some things to think about.
Thank you, Brad. And I respect the difficult position that you're in. I think I mentioned earlier, you're a much easier partner to work with than partners we've had in the past. And that's no criticism to anyone else who's been there in the past. It's just a compliment to your efforts and your work style. I would like to codify the dormitory issue here as well, if we can get that addressed. And if that means we can sit down with Martha or someone from Corporation Counsel to get that settled. I'd like to get that settled here as well, if possible. But I don't want to prolong this too far down the road. I've given myself a summer deadline. So I want to get this to the council by the summer. So summer's almost here. May's around the corner. So I don't want to keep pushing down the process too long. I do believe it should be citywide. I do think that we have a lot of development that's happening in some of these neighborhoods at the edge of the neighborhoods that I don't want to see gentrification. I don't want, or, you know, that's the big fear of what happens when you just zone it out is, well, now you have all the development going in certain areas that seem very attractive. And then you have gentrification, and I don't want to see that. I want people to still feel that these are the neighborhoods they grew up in, and these are neighborhoods that I don't want people to be afraid of development. I think that's a lot of what we've seen over the last few years, that there's a lot of fear of development and fear of what's coming in and what may push people out. And I want people to be excited about it and excited about what opportunities are coming for them versus fearing of being pushed out or being opportunities for other people, but not for them. So I'm willing to work with you, Brad. I think you've been a fair partner, and I know we've had our back and forth, and I know we're going to have our back and forth. But I do appreciate that partnership, and I'm willing to work with Martha on those points. But I also want to see this get to a point where we vote on this and not just keep kicking the can down the road. Again, for many people here, this is something that I started the process in 2020, August of 2020. So I gave myself a summer deadline because I don't want to see this. I don't want a 2-year anniversary and this not getting a vote. And, so, I'm willing to work on trying to especially codify some of that language, but we definitely need to start moving this forward and moving in a positive direction. Hyde, you're next. You had your hand up, and then Tom.
Thank you. So the legislation really changes two things, right? So it drops the unit number from 50 to 20, and then we're also jumping the 5% to 18%. I was just wondering, Alfredo, as the sponsor, if you looked at potentially staggering that based on the units, whereby at 20 units, it's a certain percentage, at 50 units, it's a certain percentage, at, above, it's a certain percentage as opposed to across the board. So just, wondered if you looked at that. And then my other question was, again, just how you, if you could say to the public viewing and everyone else, just kind of how you came up with that percentage. For me, just being new, it sounds like we're throwing the number out. So, 5 to 18 for me is not necessarily incremental. So if you just speak to that, and then Anita also had a comment, just summarize the key provision of the amended ordinance for the public. She had that in the chat section, if you could do that as well.
Yes, Eden, if you can put the amended ordinance, can we put that on Facebook? We can put it on Facebook. Okay, we can do that. We'll get that taken care of. Tom, you're next. I'm just going to answer some of the quick questions that were asked. So my magic number was different than the 18th. But when I read more about it and I saw where we currently are and saw where we've been, I pushed for the number of 18. 16% is the national average for municipalities to have inclusionary housing policies. 16%, that's the national average. 5% is where we are. So we are below the national average. We're below the state average. The state average is 10, and in some cities it's 20. New York City's 20, and other areas are even more than that. So when we look at the fact, and also I look at the fact that when I started this conversation 2 years ago, or almost 2 years ago, we're not going to get to 2 years. I'm going to still say a year and a half. It was the same time where we started the conversation about the minority and women contracts that we passed, and we raised the numbers from 17.8 to 25. We just passed an ordinance last week that raised it from 25 to 30. So if we would have had that magic number a few years ago or a year and a half ago, I think we'd probably be having a conversation of possibly raising it again today. I think we should be above the national average. I think we should not be below, and we should definitely not be at 5%. I think 5% is too low. I think 10% is too low, and I'll be quite honest with that. I think we're looking at 18, which is 2% above the national average and 2% below what New York City does. a lot of the studies are really fair, and they talk about having to have that balance of making it so that you still have incentives and you still have profitability for development, but you have enough inclusionary housing that allows the average person to be able to live in those neighborhoods. And that's what we're looking to do. And that's really what my goal is, and I think 18% is a fair number. It's more than the national average, and I'll give that. But it's also, I think it's important for us to be aggressive on this, especially with the history that we have. And especially when a year and a half ago, I was shown a map of all of the development that we had in our city, and all of the market rate and all of the affordable housing that we had. And the point of the map was to show me how we've done a good job, and we should be proud of the fact that we've really done a good job of trying to be more aggressive on getting more affordable housing in our city, and to try to get developments, on Clinton Avenue and in other parts of our city, redone and good quality housing that's affordable. But when you look at that same map, you see that, it's that split on Central Avenue. And then you look at the map from 1938, and I encourage all the members to look at the citation that I put the website of the Times Union article that shows the map, and it shows the map very clearly, and of how certain neighborhoods were considered, has I don't want to say unsafe. It was a different word that I can't pronounce, but basically, not good investments. And those neighborhoods didn't get the banking, they didn't get the support, and you had, disinvestment in those neighborhoods. And if you look at our current policy, we have those neighborhoods as getting all the affordable housing, and the other neighborhoods are getting the market rate housing. I'm a big supporter of mixed income housing. I really believe when you put, too much of affordable housing in one area, you create additional challenges, you create concentration of poverty, and you create disinvestment. I believe in mixed income, because I believe when you have mixed income, you have investment, you have developers that are going to continue to invest in their properties, and they're going to have continued expectations of their properties and their tenants, and it'll bring up the neighborhood. So that's what I've always been a supporter, while diversifying our community in a economic and social way, which we unfortunately have not had policies that have done that. So that's why we have those numbers, and that was very long-winded. So I'll let
just a quick follow-up, Alfredo.
Yes.
So yeah, just the percentage, if you could just follow up on that 50 to 20. So we're talking about national average is the 16%, and that goes with a unit number. Are we, like, when we go from 50 to 20 as to where that starts, is that consistent as well? Or is, so again, just my question about whether or not to tier it as opposed to being the same for every project.
I think the 20% is also the highest percentage of units, and I'd have to look that up, but I'm pretty confident that 20%, 20 units is the highest percentage of units that are allocated towards this. So towards towards programs that have these type of projects. Like Dominic said, some are at 5%, at 5 units. Some are like we were at 50, or like we are at 50. But the highest percentage of municipalities are at the 20%. And Don't quote me in that. I have to look that up. But I'm pretty sure that's what I read in the studies. And I will, but I can get you a direct answer on a yes or no if that was the at the next meeting, or whenever I see you next time. Tom and then Sergio.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up with Brad. Brad, I was looking through my emails and I can't find, you said you had sent out a letter, an email, about, some of the points that you wanted to make. And I'm digging through my emails. And I don't see it. I didn't check junk though, but I don't know if it had gone into junk. But do you know when you sent that out?
I think this is prior to the initial committee meeting on this. I had sent along 2 articles. One was called like the economics of inclusionary zoning, and the other one was a 5-year report from Chicago. There have been a number of places that have had the policies in place and have kind of reported back on their experiences. And amongst other things, it was interesting to read like what some of the residents that, or the advocates for that matter, were saying about the policy. And I think there were some uninspected findings, not in a bad way, not discouraging of, but just things that you could learn from experience. So I could send them.
Would you
out.
resend it? Because
Yeah.
I'm going through, I went all the way back to last year and I don't see it. So I'd really, really appreciate it if you would. And I promise to read it. It's not going to be work wasted. And the second thing I just want to follow up on is one of the questions I got, and I should have asked earlier, but how do we follow up to make sure that, if a developer comes in, puts up a building, right now we said 5%. Does somebody from the city go and check to make sure that the 5% of those apartments are affordable? How do we, who does that? What city department? Is that your department? I got questions on that.
Yeah, I believe so. So our department is responsible for when someone comes through the planning board process, they have to submit a compliance plan that sets out which units they're going to set aside. And those units have to be consistent in size and amenities and things to the distribution of the general distribution of units in that project. The community development agency and building and codes would be working together on the implementation and enforcement. Faye at Albany Community Development works with area median income numbers and those sorts of housing qualifications all the time. So they really have the subject matter expertise. And then Rick LaJoy is typically enforces zoning building related matters. So if there were a violation, the building department would, I assume, send the notice and that we prosecuted by the corporation council. Can't say that we've really gotten in it. I mean, the first couple buildings have just gone online, and in terms of enforcement, certainly not there yet. It's a good question.
What happens if somebody, goes in, they get the apartment and, maybe they're in school or something, they get a better job and now they're above that, poverty line that we're looking at. Do we go back and look at that, and do we make people like reapply every so many years? I'm just curious how do we, it's a great idea, but how do you enforce it? I can see some holes there and listening to you, so maybe I'm wrong. I'm hoping
I mean, typically ACDA would be tracking that on there's an annual sort of report that someone is supposed to submit in terms of the depth of the verification. I don't know. And there are cases too where municipalities do contract with a third party provider, that had, affordable housing group or something that operates locally to do that sort of, oversight and enforcement. But, the way that we've scoped it out, it would be ACDA. And I can't say that I know the answer to all those particular questions. Yeah.
And I appreciate that, because I know, like, even down in the city, with rent control, somebody's grandmother had the apartment and they inherited sort of with the rent control. So they really, it's when you got hundreds and thousands of units, it gets kind of, that might be something we might want to look at either now or in the future.
I don't think we're going to have hundreds of thousands. So I think it's manageable. I think there is some data out there as to what number of units you really need to think about, staffing up or something. There could be a point in the future, yeah, where, and some jurisdictions employ, fees to cover the cost of that and things, I don't think we're there yet, but, something to think about for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Sergio?
Just to stress to the point of Brad's comments and suggestions, I think he brought up a lot of valid points that we seriously need to iron out, discuss, and address. I remember back in, I guess, February when we started having this conversation about the inclusionary zoning. There is a lot of questions and discussions that came from that one meeting that I don't think since then we've had the opportunity to re-bring back up or address within this legislation. I know for me, as much as I want this legislation to work and be on a city level, my biggest concerns is looking at some of the neighborhoods that are currently still being not invested in and seeing, to your point, Alfredo, in terms of seeing like the warehouse district in the downtown area get all this investment, all these apartments that, yes, 2 years ago, if we would have had this legislation, we would have more affordable units online down there in those areas to hopefully prevent or, make up for some of that, historic, disinvestment in some of those neighborhoods. But my biggest, concern or, wonder is if, this legislation, if developers have not been investing or looking into the South End, Arbor Hill, West End, if they haven't been doing that at 5%, if this will hurt or help, the South End or some of these neighborhoods when we raise this percentage. Again, I think we didn't have that full discussion or iron out some of those other things when it comes to incentives, and also looking at some of these neighborhoods directly and individually as to how to spur investment and development, in the right way. And so there's a lot of factors that I think we all on this call need to discuss more. I think it's very important that as time continues, if Alfredo, if you're really committed to, getting this legislation, by the summertime, that we, try to have more conversations about this before that time. But also, as you already mentioned, you're willing and interested in working with Brad and everyone else to, really address those things. Again, I'm just here, voicing, my thoughts about the situation in hopes that, we can really have a conversation on just those other things that surround this topic. Planning is very difficult. It changes and the market changes as well. But we need to, be able to think creatively, but also, again, look at individual neighborhoods differently on some aspects, because some of these neighborhoods are still not getting the investment that we want to see there. So that's my 2 cents. I'll pass it back to you, Alfredo.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody's input on this. We did do the best we could to try to take as much of the concerns and issues that were brought up at the last meeting and put it into the new bill. We added an entire section with the legislative intent, and we cited where we got those numbers. Because I think that was a big question that I heard last time, and I really want to make sure people get the information, that we're being fully transparent, and that people feel comfortable with what we're voting on. So, you normally don't cite where you're getting your data, but we went to the extra extreme to make sure we cited every data point to make sure that members have that information, because I think that's important. It's important to have where we're coming up with our data and to share that, and also to try to address other issues that were brought up by the public. Shifting from the city AMI to the regional AMI. That was something that I heard from Brad, and I heard from other members from the public that that's something that they recommended. So I'm open to working on making this a stronger piece of legislation, making this something that's transparent. The one thing I want to be very clear on is I don't want to just be working on something to be working on something with the intent of it never going to a vote. I have an intent of this going to a vote, and I want to make sure that the request to address certain issues are not to hold the legislation back from getting a vote, because I do believe it deserves a vote. I believe it deserved a vote back in August. So back in August in 2020. So I keep bringing that back because I've definitely have been very patient in trying to get this to a place where people feel comfortable, and I am very appreciative of everybody's effort and everybody's time. I know there was a lot of emails that went back and forth between planning department, a lot of emails that went for corporation counsel, a lot of emails what Todd was involved in helping add some language. So I'm very appreciative of all of everyone's time and everybody's effort, and I'll continue to take your time to keep making this stronger. But at some point, there needs to be a vote, and we need to move this forward, and that's not today, and I respect that, but I want to make sure that everybody is, as we're working on this, everybody's in the mentality of that's where we want to get to, and that we hope Alfredo gets hit by a bus tomorrow and this goes away. I don't plan on getting hit by a bus. I got a little guy that keeps me going. Sergio, your hand went up first, and then Tom, and then Hyde, and then I'd like to open it up to members from the public. This isn't public comment. I think many of you have been put on as panelists, so I want to make sure you're also part of the conversation that we're having here. So Sergio, then Tom, then Hyde.
So what I have is just a quick thought that just came to me as we were talking about some of that enforcement piece when it comes to developments. And I guess the concern or question is, when it comes to some of these new developments, I'm also noticing and seeing that sometimes they're setting aside apartments to use as like Airbnbs. And I guess my question is to kind of, again, like back to that enforcement piece, if, some of those developments are actually able to do that when they could be using that as, apartments to rent out, but they're keeping it strictly as an Airbnb and upcharging on those apartments to make more money throughout the year. If that is something that is also looked into when it comes to the enforcement piece, or even if, I don't know if the developers actually can do that, if that's not a problem at all. That was just a thought. I don't know if Brad, if you know anything about that and how that works, or anyone on the call, but just a thought.
Sergio, you unmute. You muted yourself.
Sorry, I know there's just a few places in downtown Albany, some of the newer buildings who are, using their apartments as Airbnbs instead of renting them out, and just, how does that work?
I've never seen anyone submit an application to the planning board that said these are going to be Airbnbs. It's not to say that it doesn't happen. I mean, I think that's a very difficult issue because it's established itself in the market to a certain degree, and there does become a point, and people have different opinion where that is when it becomes a problem, not just for rents, but for quality of life in some cases. So, it's not an issue that's currently enforced. I think it would take, again, it's another sort of one of those things that would take a little bit of effort to try and figure out the best way to do that, particularly given that it's already sort of an established part of the economy. And again, it's not just people downtown renting them for income. It's, people that have them in their homes or their garage or things like that, that may be relying on that to pay their mortgage or something. So there's not, there are companies I get emails all the time of companies that would love to provide us with that service for a fee, tell us where all the Airbnbs are, et cetera, et cetera. It's something that's currently not addressed in our code, but we don't typically see people that come in and say, I'm going to do an Airbnb. It's just, they're just apartments, and they treat them as such until they're not.
Okay, thank you. And I do want to just also touch on another piece. Enforcement has been brought up a few times, and that's something that we need to start working on and start the conversation now as a separate piece of legislation, so that we can move that forward, but not hold this up in the meantime. I have Tom, Hyde, Megan, and then I want to open up to anyone in the public. If you want to say anything, just raise your hands.
Yeah, real fast. I just wanted to acknowledge Chris Betts had put something in the chat. He'd like to talk. So you already addressed it, Alfredo. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Tom. Hyde?
Yeah, just saying your thing about the last meeting we had, there was some discussion about if the developer cannot meet that or wants to seek a waiver, is that still permitted under this? Have we addressed that? I know there have been different comments from committee members as to whether or not people could pay into a fund, or just want to see where we stood on that, because I don't know if we fully addressed that at the last meeting.
I don't think we fully addressed it. I think that's something we can address. I just don't want to have too many heavy items that hold this from moving forward either. But
But as it currently stands, you can seek. Sorry to cut you off, but
no. Actually, Brad could probably. I can answer that better.
I can speak to it. So the section that the passage is currently in is not a section of our code that would allow a planning board waiver. So I don't think that's an issue. I think potentially they could seek a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals. But what type of variance that would be and what that process would be, we need to consult with counsel and figure out how that would work.
But as it stands right now, a developer has to meet 5% if you're over 50. There's no process by which you cannot, you wouldn't have to meet those requirements.
Like I said, potentially a variance. We haven't had anyone really ask that question about where it currently stands. No.
Okay. Yeah, Alfredo, not trying to hold anything up, but I think, general good planning practice is that not everything fits perfectly. So, to the extent there is a process, maybe we need to discuss that.
No, I get that. And I think codifying the dormitory issue will help address some of that issue, because that was the reason, the only buyout that I'm aware of had to do with a dormitory issue. I'm not going to say dormitory issue. That's where I'm going to leave it. So I think cleaning that up will help address that, and then we can go from there. Megan, and then Todd.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to circle back to Sergio's comments about the Airbnbs, we don't have anything on the books in Albany for that right now. And it is an issue not just around development projects, but also an issue in terms of tax revenue for us. So it is something that I think we do need to take a look at. But there are also some other pieces, I believe, at the state level that we need to kind of collectively push for to ensure that that sort of tax revenue piece comes along with that for the city. And then there's also kind of like buildings and codes issues around Airbnbs, which is a sort of a separate committee, but it does sort of present as like, how do you ensure that there's an occupancy certificate for that particular kind of use for wherever these people are going and paying to stay. So I just wanted to point that out. It's something that comes up as a complaint quite often in my district. So.
Thank you. Todd and then Chris, did you want to say something? Okay, I'm gonna have you after Todd. Thank you.
I just want to thank you, Alfredo. I just want to speak briefly to the question of like applicability to dormitories. I wasn't I didn't attend the public discussion where that was raised, so I'm not entirely familiar with the nature of the arguments that were raised at the time. My understanding is the way this ordinance is written is that it fits into the existing code and just says, it uses the existing code's categories of what's residential, what's mixed commercial, and is written to apply to those existing categories. And if you look at the categories that are in the code, the only thing that it seems that it wouldn't cover just on its plain language would be industrially zoned. So I'm not sure if that was the issue or if it was whether we needed to add a definition of dwelling unit to clarify that, in the standard, it's just a place where you sleep that has amenities for eating and just sort of clarifying it in a making it broad, but it doesn't seem to be a very difficult, issue to deal with just through drafting to clarify that aspect. And, if there's specific questions about other legal risks or issues, I've had a chance to sort of look at some of the lawsuits, which don't seem to be faring too well, challenging, the mandatory inclusionary zoning policies across the nation. It's most courts, recognize that it's part of the valid police power of local jurisdictions, depending on the way the state constitution is written. And we have a home rule constitution here in New York State. So, I don't think those are probably very difficult at all. And so we could easily clean those up, I think, with just a few short amendments or something. But if there are other questions, I'd be happy to sort of have, draw upon the law school's resources to sort of help clarify the nature of them or look into them. So, just wanted to point that out, but that's all I had to say.
Thank you. And again, thank you for your legal advice and legal help in this process and guidance with all the information that you've helped get for us. I think the major issue with the waiver was that it just recently happened just in the last 6-7 months, and it's the first time I think it's happened since we had the USDO. So I think that's why it was a voice of conversation of how can we clean it up so that it doesn't happen again. And part of that is the dormitory issue that I'm open and willing to work with Brad to see how we can get that cleaned up. If we can get that done and get that put into this legislation, then I'm open to that. Chris and then Dominic.
Great. Well, thank you. I know Councilman Blair and we got to speak a little bit late last week. And I know you've been working on this, all of you have been working on this for quite some time. I'm new to the process. So I'm just catching up a little bit, but I'm certainly not trying to interject any kind of delay or anything like that, but just trying to be a helpful resource. I'm a city resident and my career, my profession is to develop affordable housing. I've worked on some projects in Albany. I work throughout New York State. So most of what I'm doing is trying to develop these affordable housing projects. And what's informative or maybe helpful is that more and more of these projects that were previously located and concentrated in certain neighborhoods, there's more and more efforts, and I'm seeing it in the projects I'm working on throughout the state, where those projects are moving to other neighborhoods. And in addition, those projects are being economically integrated so that they're not just serving very poor, just low-income folks, but there's a realization of a value of diversifying the individual apartment complex or projects that we're working on. So I think that's a response to a lot of the concerns that are here, although from completely the other end. Most of what I do, like I said, it's mostly affordable housing. And then we try to have some unregulated units in it or some middle income units in it. And I know there's some projects in Albany that are under consideration now that are outside of the neighborhoods that most of the projects have been located in the past. But also in my career, I did some work with market rate developers. I spoke to a few in the past few days just to kind of get their sense of this. And they seem to be quite concerned, and my understanding of the numbers and how they look at it sort of reflects what Brad articulated, which is, there's a definite economic impact. And, I share all of the goals here. That's very important to me. That's what my career is. But on the other hand, we don't want to have a sort of a tipping point where we're keeping developers from coming in or scaring them out. So even if we put in the legislation short term or temporarily and then respond, once developers see that the legislation is there, they may just say they don't want to wait for the legislation to be amended in the future. So that was one concern. But I think Brad also mentioned, some sort of compensating incentive, whether it's additional pilot or whether it's some sort of a fund to make up for their economic loss. And I know they're making money. Some of them are making a lot of money, but they're, if they're already going for a pilot, they're already being scrutinized quite a bit for the amount of money that they're making. Now they're going to be making less. So they'll get less money from their banks to build their projects, and they'll just see their return on their investment as being potentially hampered. So again, I'm not trying to slow things down, but I just think there's some sense that these numbers, the 18% and the 50%, maybe just need to be further examined or tested by developers who are doing this, just to see what their reactions are. And I know people said, well, all developers are going to say that doesn't work for me because that's just how they react, but maybe that'll help inform where this needs to go. So I just hope I can be a resource. I'm just very concerned about this issue. Affordable housing is all that I do. Thank you for letting me talk.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you for stepping up in many ways. We put out a call last meeting to see if we can get any developers that could speak on this, and Chris's Capitalized Albany reached out to Chris, and Chris said he'd be willing to work with us, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work that you've done on affordable housing and that issue in our city. So thank you for that. Dominic.
Oh, thanks again for letting me speak. A couple of things that Councilman Hoey brought up, the thing about condominiums and the Broadway one. Part of the issue with the condominiums around here is that, at least up to now, the financial institutions, when the Broadway project was done, they wanted 60% of the units to have been bought under contract before they would even approve the financing. So that was even before the building could even be built. So that was an issue. That's why the one on Broadway wasn't built and ended up becoming apartments instead of condominiums. But they do in some places. I have a lot of experience in Massachusetts because both my kids live there. They have gone, like my son lives in Arlington, even two families are condominiums. They have divided them up. Each floor is a separate ownership unit. That was proposed many years ago, just to let you know. The Robinsons actually, Charles Obon Robinson and Mark Robinson had proposed that many years ago, that we turn these 2 units and 3 units into condominiums so that people could have home ownership, because it does improve a neighborhood, pride of place if you own where you live, and those types of things. And that never got off the ground. I don't know if it was because of the Robinson name or because Albany is a little bit behind on a lot of things when it comes to these types of thoughts. But it might be something to look into. But the problem was, once they started doing this, the prices of the condo units, even the 1 and 2 families, have gone through the roof. I will tell you what my son paid for a one flat condo in Arlington, but it's well more than what you see any prices in Albany for houses that are sold, for full houses. I can tell you it's at least twice the amount of what the high-end houses in Albany sell for. And that's for 1 flat without a garage, by the way. And the prices are even have gone up more. The house next door to him is now sold for $300,000 more than what his 2-family, well, his flat, but what his flat sold for. Went up $300,000 more within a year. But the demand, again, that's Boston demand's great. It's like talking about Chicago, but again, Chicago's a lot bigger city. So it's hard to compare that. The idea of putting a fund and have people put money into a fund if they don't want to do the apartments, it doesn't work. I studied this for many years when I was on the Common Council 9 years ago, for my 12 years on the council, and part of Housing for All. Most places that have that, the developers are willing to put in some money to the fund rather than have affordable housing units. So you don't get affordable housing units. You get some money in a fund and it doesn't do any good. It doesn't build any more units. It might help the city, or maybe, supplement something a little bit, but it's nowhere near the cost of, or the benefit, community benefit of having an actual apartment that's designated for low-income people. The only places I've seen where it has worked is where the developers actually have to put up the money that's equal to, or at least within a very tight range of the income that they would be getting from the affordable unit. And so it really doesn't work. It's easy out. When I was on EA, I was able to get a proposal put in for developers if they wanted to get extra points so they could get a bit of pilot, was to increase the inclusionary housing numbers from the very low 5%, 5% of 50 units or more. Not one developer chose that option. Not one. 7 years I was on that IDA. Never was that option ever checked off to get extra points, to get extra pilot money. So that fund and that stuff and those types of incentives really don't work in reality. It sounds good. It looks good. Yeah, we're going to get some money from the developer for inclusionary housing, but unless it doesn't increase the amount of units that you have and that you need. So that's to me, that's a major issue, unless you can really put something in there that makes the amount of offset actually equal to what the inclusionary housing unit would be over 5 years or 10 years, whatever you want, how many years you want to put it in. It's not an incentive at all. It's actually a disincentive for having inclusionary units. So that was another issue that we talked about. There was a third one. I think it was something Chris Betts put up. I didn't realize, Chris, you were living in Albany. I know we worked together at the Community Builders when you did the Help at the Grand Street project many years ago. I didn't know you were still here, so that's good to see you here. So those are two concerns. The other thing about, like, Carol put up, the developers, they're going to say they can't afford it. Well, we were told the same thing when the original inclusionary housing went in a few years ago, 3 years ago now. Nobody's going to develop in Albany. And here it is, 5% units, 50 units or more, 100% AMI. Nobody's going to develop. It's going to kill the development. Chris Spencer, then the planning czar and everything. Big arguments with him that we were crazy. Dorsey Players at the time, county council member, now the city auditor, had an argument with the mayor about this. I happened to be there in the room and they were having this discussion, an argument. It was a discussion. The professionals, they're not like me. They don't argue, they discuss. And had a big, long discussion about it. The mayor was against it because Chris Spencer was against it. No development. I can tell you one thing, my 7 years on the council, I bet you there was more on IDA. There was more development in those 7 years and more development after the inclusionary housing went in 3 years ago than the city of Albany had seen in 300 years. Look it up. Look at how many apartments have been developed, how many buildings have been rehabbed, how many new units are being built, and show me another 5-year period in the city of Albany where that happened in the last 300 years. I beg anybody to do that for me. Brad, you can probably look it up. You know, you're in the planning department. Look it up and tell me. Go back to 2000. Go back to 1980. Go back to 1920. And tell me you can see how many apartments being built. And we were told by Chris Spencer right to my face that it could never happen. That I was killing the city of Albany by supporting this proposal and fighting for it. And it was a lousy 5% at 100% AMI. Well, I must be wrong. Boston must be wrong with what they do with their AMI because they're building apartments going crazy. My daughter lives in Worcester. They have so many plans now for buildings and they all have to include affordable housing. Downtown is going to be like a warehouse district right now. There's so many old buildings being rehabbed and they all have to include inclusionary housing. And the development is through the roof now. They have a backup of plans that they're looking at. And the funny thing is, Chris Spencer happens to be in Worcester right now. How ironic is that? So again, it can be done. There's ways to do it. The city of Somerville, Massachusetts, you want to go look. Council members go to the city of Somerville. The government handles the affordable housing. The mayor's office lists the apartments that are for rent. They give you what the AMI is. They give you what the rent is for each unit. How many people, 3, 4, 5 people, 1 person studio. How many family members? You go through the city unit. They check it every year. You have to reapply. Your income is checked every year. This is not rocket science. That's about sending somebody to the moon. Albany Housing Authority has to do it with their tenants. They've been doing it. How long has Albany Housing Authority been in existence? They've been doing it since then. Go talk to Albany Housing Authority. Say, gee, how do you evaluate your tenants every year? So the ones that can live in your apartments, how do you do their income? It's not that hard. Why the city of Albany government makes it so difficult to do something that other cities and municipalities do that is easy? Just like I said, you got Albany Housing Authority sitting right there, right in our backyard. I'm sure they have the expertise to show the city government how it can be done. And we really need this inclusionary housing. I haven't done the council now for 9 years. I still get calls about bad apartments, about rents being jacked up, about people not getting the leases renewed. And I haven't been on the council for 9 years. I still get called. So it's an issue in the city that they have to face it. We need to face it. Anita brought up the redlining issue. It's 100% correct. And so let's do it. Now's the time to do it. We have a new council. We have people with good ideas, really good thoughts, and the argument, the discussions they bring up are wonderful. So let's move on with this and let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. And thank you for your history on this and bringing some history about this specific policy to us, because none of us were there in 2017. None of us that are on the committee today were in elective office at the time or in the room. So I think that's a good source of history. Also, your experience in the IDA, I think, is critical because you're telling us information that you understand from someone being in the room who've put together these pilots for these developments. So I think that's great information for us, and I appreciate you taking your time and being here and sharing that. And also, I don't think that incentive program hasn't, even after you've left the IDA, I don't think any developer has taken that incentive program to date. So I think incentives are great, but unfortunately they're not working here, and it hasn't really brought the results that we hope to have from them. I do want to clarify one thing. I have been in contact with the administration on this. So they know that this is something I've been working on. They've been in the room in the conversations, and I have not gotten the pushback that I think others have had in 2017. So I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to get this across the line. And I think we need to just work out work out and fine tune some remaining issues. But thank you again for being here and your comments. I've got Maria next, and then Brad, and then after that, anyone else want to say anything or make any questions? Raise your hand now. Otherwise, I'm going to have these will be our last two speakers before we close up. Okay, Maria, the floor is yours.
Hi. Yes, I just want to reiterate that, the inclusionary housing policy addresses folks who really, are often over income for the very low income housing, like public housing, but can't afford the $1,200-$1,500 a month rents that they're seeing come on the market in Albany. I mean, these are people who work for nonprofit housing, who do support services. And that market really needs, these are folks that want to live in the city that they work in, and yet find it very, very difficult. I mean, we're talking about people making in the mid-30s. And this is the housing that Inclusionary addresses, and it's so, so needed. And I just want to reinforce what Anita said, is that the beauty of an inclusionary housing policy is it is economic diversity in one building. And, that's great. I mean, there's right now we have a lot of, upscale housing, and we have lower income subsidized housing, but they're separate. And what's important about inclusionary housing is it mixes people of income in the same space. And so I think that's extremely important. And I think we can work out, all the other little details that people are raising. But it's important, I think, is to go on with this policy, because we need it now more than ever. So thank you for, your efforts, Alfredo, on getting this through, because it's so, so important. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for everyone who's on here and who's having these conversations, because these aren't easy conversations to have, but it's good that we're having it. Brad, you're next.
Can't imagine you're gonna let me go last, Alfredo, but I just wanted, I don't know that I've ever taken the same approach as predecessors or colleagues. I don't think I ever said the 5% wouldn't work. I don't think I've said the 18% wouldn't work. I just think that we're guessing at this point. And I think there's a way to find the right number that would work. And we're just saying that we're not gonna go through the effort of doing that. If not, why don't we just pick 40% and say that that's the number? Because, frankly, if that worked, I would support that policy, because I think there is a real crisis with rents in the city of Albany. So that's all I would say. I appreciate the passion that Dominic brings to the table. I just wanted to clarify. And I'm not saying any particular number is not going to work. I'm just saying I think we're guessing. So.
Well, I can't let you go last. But thank you, Brad. And listen, I've said it throughout this meeting. You're a very different person to work with than many of us have had experience with, over the last few years. So, we appreciate that. But there's also, you have to understand, it's also a history of, how things, were done and how people felt when those things were done. And that history is hard to erase, and it's hard to create. It's hard to erase and it's hard to forget. The great part is that we have now an opportunity to create new memories, a new history, maybe a different history than what was experienced 7 years ago. So that's what I'm looking forward to, and that's what I hope we do here with this and with a lot of other complicated and difficult conversations that we'll have in the next few years in this committee. With that, I am going to just give everyone homework again, because I think we got a lot of our homework done last time, and I think we're in a better place than we were in the beginning of this conversation a few months ago. So I'm going to give us homework again to get done for our next meeting. Hopefully we'll get together again in May. That's my goal, is to get together in May, late May. My next couple of weeks pretty hectic, but late May, hope to get together again, and hopefully we get some of this homework accomplished. The first thing that I heard was we need to codify the language regarding the dormitory. So that's Brad, myself, and Martha. Let's sit down and get that codified and taken care of. That was something I think members had concerns about. I also think that addresses the waiver issue that was brought up a few months ago regarding the fact that it was a dormitory building, that a dormitory-like building that received that opportunity to buy and pay for themselves out of this. So I think if we can clear that up and get that cleaned up, that's addresses multiple issues that people have. Also, I think we need to gather some more information. I think we need to reach out to our friends. I'm gonna put this, reach out to Sarah from Capitalize Albany, see if we can get some of that data from the IDA that shows the numbers and shows the market rates. And hopefully Chris, I don't know if Chris is still with us, but hopefully Chris can also help us get some of that information so we can look at the real numbers of what we're talking about and you know, address those issues and concerns that have been brought up. The other issue is get some more information about the 20 units that, and that's on me. I'm gonna take that on. I'm almost positive I read somewhere that I think it's 37% of all of the municipalities have it, but I'm gonna get that number so we can get that settled. And then I think enforcement is something that we need to have a conversation about, but I think we also need to address the fact that that's probably a conversation beyond this bill. I think that's something that's going to take in more departments than what we have on the table right now, and different entities. And I want to make sure that we do that right. And I want to make sure that we do enforcement correctly. So I think that's something we can have a conversation about, but with an understanding that that's something that we're looking to get more in the weeds and beyond addressing what we have here. What we have here, originally I thought would be just a simple numbers discussion, but you know, it's grown to more than that, and that's okay. That's a good thing. You know, sometimes something's got to spark conversations about other topics. Otherwise, you don't address those topics as well. So with that, we have our homework. A lot of it falls on you, Brett. A lot of it falls on me, and some of it falls on Sarah. But we know what we need to get done. I think I appreciate all the effort, time, and energy that's been put into this by so many entities so far, and we'll keep moving forward. With that, do I have any questions, concerns, or comments before I put for a motion to adjourn? No? Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Motion made by Sergio, a second.
Second.
Seconded by Hyde. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, unanimous. Thank you, everybody.